there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Where you gonna be tonight? Oh, oh, oh. There's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. There's magic coming. Get ready for the rest of your life.
Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome to SassafrasCast. I am an absolute lunatic, and I am recording this month's episode of SassafrasCast at the same time as I am launching an intuition class. I'm doing a 2-day intuition workshop right now, and I will be running a 6-week learning how to work with your intuition and your emotional wisdom journey that I'm kind of using this workshop to launch. And I decided to just also record the podcast episode at the same time because I wanted to be around the same topic. So I'm a little all over the place today, and that may be why this podcast feels a little looser or a little more live than usual. As always, I do record these podcasts live for my patrons, and that's a patron benefit if you would like to tune in and be a part of it. But we are talking today about a topic that I have become fully obsessed with, which is the intersection of intuition and our emotional wisdom. So in a moment, we will begin the witchy weather report, and I'll start talking about this topic. But first, let me introduce myself and the podcast and shout out my patrons. Hello and welcome to SassafrasCast. This is a podcast full of witchy insights to help you lead your best life, your sassiest life. I am Rorie Kelly, a tarot reader, singer-songwriter, and all-around personal growth nerd from Long Island, New York. In just a moment, we will begin the witchy weather report. But first, a shout out to my patrons. If you didn't know, you can support this podcast at patreon.com/Sassafras Tarot for $1 a month or more. I record these episodes live, and my patrons get a private YouTube link before each one so they can tune in for the live recording, hang out in the chat, ask questions, and get them answered in real time. They also get access to a witchy Discord server where we talk about all things witchy and wonderful, and a shout out in each episode. Here we go. Thank you, Amanda Curry, Melissa Marie Imagery, Rachel Miller, Grayson, Millie Orozco, Ruby, Rebecca Jones, Brittany, Hannah Westlock, Brittany Campbell, and Jennifer McPhail. I think that I got everyone in that shout out, but I'm confessing to you, I'm giving you my true confession that I'm reading it from last month's list instead of going right to my Patreon page, because I am a little all over the place today, my dear friends. Just a smidgen. I'm a smidgen disjointed today because I am running this workshop. I have a tarot party later because it is the season. It's the middle of October. I always get super booked during this time of year, and I'm recording the podcast this weekend because I'm insane. But I'm really excited and passionate about this topic. I'm also going to give myself a quick check on YouTube to make sure I can be seen and heard. So let me just do that really quickly and make sure things are coming through. And then we'll go into the witchy weather report. Yep, cool. I see myself, I hear myself, I love it. If you are tuned in, please feel free to say hello in the chat. And let me know if you have thoughts and feelings about this topic. Let me know that too, because I would love to hear them. And some of you may or may not be tuned in because I literally just ran the intuition workshop day 1. I'll be talking a lot of about some of the same topics that I talked about in the workshop, and I will be offering some of the practices that we offered during the workshop as well. That's going to be our Which You Got This section. Is we're going to do an emotional inventory and grounding practice that you can do before an intuition practice, in order to help you sort out facts, feelings, different types of truth, emotional truth versus factual truth, those kind of things. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let's do the witchy weather report. Let me grab a tarot deck. Reading today, because it was the first tarot deck at hand, from the Universal Weight Tarot deck, which I believe is, it's the original line drawings that Pamela Coleman Smith drew for the Smith Waite Tarot deck, but I believe it has been recolored by Mary Hanson Roberts. So it's got a little bit of both of their flavors on there. The Hanson Roberts tarot deck is a deck that I used to read with all the time, and I lost during a move at some point. And it was like my go-to deck for a lot of years. So this is like kind of a hybrid for me. Anyway, when I do the Witchy Weather Report, what I do is comment a little bit on the vibe of the moment. I have a couple things to share about that. I'm recording this live in the middle of October 2024. It will probably go live later in October 2024, probably about a week from today, as far as getting to all the different podcasting sites, because I'm doing a million things, and that's when I anticipate getting it uploaded. So I'll share a little bit about that kind of energy of the moment here in October 2024, but I'll also be pulling a card that is intended for everyone, no matter when and where you're listening to this. So energy of the moment, we have had a series of full moons, new moons, and eclipses, lunar and solar eclipses over the last several weeks. A lot of people are in a big transition period of our lives, and a lot of people in particular are revisiting or closing out old stories and entering into new stories around topics and situations that we have been dealing with for as recently as the last 6 months or the last year and a half, or as far back as the last 15 or 16 years, depending on kind of our own personal astrology situation. So I'm one of the 15 or 16 years people, and let me tell you, it's been an interesting time. Emotionally, eclipses bring up information, and these eclipses are bringing up new information around these different cycles that we've been dealing with for a long time. You know, like, even if we've only been dealing with them for like 6 months or 18 months or whatever, that's a long time. We are meant to challenge our perceptions of reality at this time. We are meant to discern how we've been showing up for these different topics and how we can show up new for them, because it is a time when we have an opportunity to truly say goodbye to shit that's not serving us anymore. There's the explicit rating on the podcast. Beautiful humans, I curse during this podcast. I curse during tarot readings. If you don't like it, there are other tarot readers out there. So anyway, all that is to say, if the energy feels chaotic, it's because it is. It's because there's everyone you know, and probably also you, is on this journey of kind of like revising and revisiting these really big cycles in our lives, these big chapters. We're making big changes. We're closing out old tabs, you know, so to speak. Like a browser window that has a lot of tabs open. We're closing out the ones that are no longer relevant for us, or that are no longer good and helpful on our journey, that perhaps have become harmful or simply have become irrelevant and a waste of time and energy, so that we can go on this new journey. And many of us have a very clear picture of what that new journey will look like, and we're pushing towards it. And many of us simply have a very clear picture of what is no longer working, and we're pushing away from it. And most of us are somewhere in between. So something I've been telling everyone all month is that when you enter into a new chapter in your life, very rarely is it clean, turn the page energy. Like, old chapter's gone, new chapter started. That happens sometimes. An example might be graduation, right? You graduate from high school or college or whatever, and it's very, very clear that you've graduated. One day you were enrolled as a student, the next day you were not, you were a graduate, right? And that, by the way, is when the death card comes up. The death card comes up when we have the type of change in our lives that is like stepping through a portal we cannot step back from. So death is like that, right? One day someone is alive, the next day they are not with us, right? But other things that are like that are also represented by the death card, such as graduation. One day we are a student, the next day we are a graduate, right? Turning our majority age, right, which in the United States is 18. One day we are a minor and we are in the care of our caregiver, like legally speaking, and the next day we can make all our own legal decisions, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we feel magically different on our 18th birthday or on the day of our graduation or whatever it might be. We still have some emotional processing to do. Most things are a slower fade than that. Most things are not like turning a simple page. So what's happening right now for many people is the past is fading out and the future is fading in. So we're experiencing a crossfade, right? A collision of energies where we are working towards the future that we want, and we are also actively closing doors on the past shit that we don't want, that we know isn't working for us, and we're experiencing therefore a mix of both. We're getting old energy and we're getting new energy, and there's like weird collisions happening, right, as they mix. And so it's just a chaotic time. And I don't have anything much to tell you other than like that's the nature of it. It's a chaotic time. Take good care of yourself while you go through this time. Make sure you're nurturing your squishy human body and getting enough sleep and staying hydrated and everything. Be good to yourself along the way and try to keep yourself focused on your values and what you really want, because you will get you will get frequent opportunities to act on those values to shape your future. You will sometimes be called upon to make a judgment call very quickly, and it will feel like a pop quiz from the universe. Do I act the old way or do I act the new way? So let's try to affirm the values, the person we want to be, the future we want to create for ourselves with our action. And the way to do that is just by getting grounded regularly in how we feel and what we care about, what's important to us, spending time with ourselves so that we remember this is what I want, this is what I'm working towards, this is what matters to me. Let's pull a card. This card is for everyone. Anytime, whether you're listening to this right away, like live with me as a patron, or whether you're listening to it the day it comes out, or here in October 24, or whether you're listening to it a few years later and you're like binge listening to my podcast or just happened upon this, in which case, welcome, thank you. This card is for you right in the moment as you're hearing it. And my intention is for it to have something of value to share with you in that moment. Our card is the 10 of Wands. Put some stuff down. What are you carrying? You're carrying a lot right now. So let's talk about the 10 of Wands. We carry a lot when we are passionate. We carry a lot based on our feelings about what is important. I was talking a little bit about living our values, and something that many of us do is we live our values by taking on responsibility. We take on responsibility. We say, this is important to me, therefore I do this. Family is important for me, therefore maybe I'm the glue that holds the family together. Maybe I'm the one that organizes the events. Showing up emotionally for other people is important to me, therefore I am an ear for someone if they're going through something, even if that feels like it's a lot of emotional labor, right? Showing up for my family and providing for them is important for me. Therefore, I work a lot, right? I take on responsibility to be able to be a provider. Whatever it is that's important for you often translates into us taking on responsibilities. Now, that is an expression of you living your values. So there's nothing inherently wrong with it. But when we get overwhelmed, when we get burnout, that's when we have to make an evaluation. We have to ask ourselves, if you are watching on the video, you are seeing, and I'll describe it for those who are not, but so you know, there is a video version of this podcast, youtube.com/@SassafrasTarot. There's a guy carrying, or I guess this is kind of a person of indeterminate gender, carrying a bunch of sticks. 10 of them. They're very big. They're taller than he is. They're kind of gathered, but it's a lot to carry. And as someone, I'm a musician, as someone who knows what it's like to carry an armful of mic stands, this guy is really feeling it, because it's not just that there's a burden of weight. It's also that they're like unwieldy and it's difficult to carry. He can't see where he's going. He's just carrying so much that it's just like a slog. Now, he's on his way back to his village. Presumably, he's carrying these sticks on purpose for something he cares about, and he is almost at his destination. However, I know how this guy feels. Again, as someone who has carried an armful of mic stands and speaker stands into a gig, carrying perhaps more than I should at one time and barely able to navigate getting through the door, he's like, when do I get to put this down? When do I get to put this down? So that's the energy right now. You have probably taken on responsibilities that are reflective of who you are as a human being, that are reflective of what matters to you, and it's beautiful that you've done that. And also, if you carry too much and take on too much, you literally can't see where you're going. You're likely to bump into things. You might hurt yourself or others because you can't see where you're going. And it's not sustainable at some point. So your moment now might be to evaluate, is there anything I can put down? Do I have to just hustle through? Is there a quick finish line where I'm going to be all right, and can I make it? Or is there something I can put down? spoiler alert, you're allowed to ask for help. Just because you're living your values doesn't mean you have to take everything on your shoulders and your shoulders alone, because I'm going to suggest a new value for to live by if you're not already living by it, the value of taking wonderful care of yourself. And I will say that if you're taking wonderful care of yourself, what it means is that your HP, your health points, will be always close to full, so that when different things occur, you are able to respond to them as your full best self instead of as your depleted self, and you might not be able to respond at all, right? When you take wonderful care of yourself, you're able to live your values well. You're able to show up for those you care about and the things that you care about because you have the bandwidth to do so. And when you take so much on that you're barely able to stumble through life, then you're living at a deficit. There is going to be diminishing returns, and you're not as able to adapt yourself to the life you truly want to live, to show up meaningfully. So I'm going to suggest this value of practicing excellent self-care for yourself. And if you have trouble being kind to yourself, I'm going to suggest it as a part of living your values. I can live my values well when I am tending to my mental and physical and emotional health. Because if I'm not tending to those things, I can't make good decisions. I am overworked and overburdened, and I can't respond as my wisest, best self to the situations that life brings to my door. I can't live my values if I am not taking care of myself. So I invite you to take this on as a value. I take excellent care of my physical, mental, and emotional health so that I can live my values and bring my best to the world. And please remember, your best means what you have to offer that doesn't harm you and doesn't put you at a deficit. Your best doesn't mean overextending and depleting yourself. That's when it stops being your best and starts being harmful behavior. Your best means what you have to offer while maintaining your own healthy balance. Because if your best depletes you inside of a day, then the next day you don't have a best to offer, do you? Right? You just have to recover. So your best is what you can do without self-depletion, without living at a deficit. And I invite you to consider that in the coming weeks. I invite you to consider, how can I live my values, including the value of taking very good care of myself so that I can show up and put my best foot forward with the world. So I can be the best me instead of the depleted me as I go through my life. Okay, let's talk about intuition and emotional wisdom. I'm obsessed with this topic. Let's talk a little bit about where I'm coming from on this topic. A lot of you know me as a tarot reader. Some of you who are listening have gotten readings from me. In fact, if you're a $10 and up patron, you get a reading from me every month. Many of you know me as a reader. And probably also a bunch of you know me as like a general witchy person. That's what this podcast is kind of about, like witchy stuff, witchy self-care. I've been reading tarot for 25 years. And that's like I guess it's 25 years at this point. I know I started in my teenage years at some point. I'm 40. I just turned 40 this year. So that's about 25 years. I think around 15, maybe even a little earlier, maybe 13 or 14 was when I started working with the cards seriously. And I've put in way more than my 1,000 hours, right? I'm willing and able to claim myself as a really good tarot reader. And the topic of intuition has been one that I have related to in very different ways over the years. I haven't been shy about the fact that I'm kind of agnostic about a bunch of different spiritual, witchy, etc. phenomena on this podcast. And there are people who simply hear that I read tarot cards or simply hear that I use the word witch to describe myself, and they're like, oh, this is one of these woo-woo people who, like, whatever, you know, I don't know, she thinks that the moon is going to heal her and she doesn't vaccinate her kids or something, whatever. I don't have children. I would vaccinate them if I had children. I do vaccinate myself. But, you know, what I'm saying is that people hear that I'm into tarot or whatever, and they immediately have a picture in their heads of who I am as this very new agey, woo-woo, intuitive type of person. And the truth is, and some of those are stereotypes that are a little harmful, right? And I say it with a little bit of an air of humor. And I think that there are other people who hear me talk and may be frustrated within the witchy community, because I am someone who kind of takes everything with a grain of salt. I don't need to believe that everything I'm experiencing is happening on some kind of like deep psychological or spiritual level. I don't know, the concept of having a soul. I don't know what a soul is exactly. I don't know if I believe that I have a soul that transcends my body and could live multiple lifetimes or experience different things on different planes. I like the idea of it. I don't know how I feel about in terms of like what I can view as fact versus something that I like the idea of, right? And I've also come to a conclusion that if something isn't hurting me to believe, and it is adding value to my life, it's worth acting as though I believe it, and it's worth diving down that, kind of diving into that water, into that depth, and experiencing that as a journey without putting a lot on like, I have to believe every moment of this to be true. And the tarot has been an example of that. There have been times when I've read the cards and really felt like I don't believe anything is happening other than my own psychology is being activated by this imagery, and it seems to help, so whatever, if it helps, it helps, right? And there have been times when I've been very, very sure that I'm getting like some pretty real information from not me, or at least not my current embodied, like intellectual human mind, from at a minimum like my higher self, you know what I mean? And those are all feelings. Those are all feelings, not facts. I can't really do a scientific study to tell you what's happening under the hood. When I access my intuition through tarot or other means, when I do something like perform a ritual and see results from it, I can't tell you exactly what's happening. I can't tell you if it's all the fact that I've just done something psychologically to myself to create the ability to see opportunities and go after them. And so because I've worked that psychological thing on myself, I now am able to create a self-fulfilling prophecy and do it. And it's actually all like kind of a mind game, which, by the way, if that is true, it's worth doing because it's gotten great results for a lot of people. It's great. If that's all magic is, I'm still co-signing on magic being a really valid and important part of my life. Or if maybe there is more, more to it. And I work, and I haven't even talked about this openly because I'm so on the fence about what I do and don't believe. But like, I work with guides, and I work with my intuition, and I work with the elements, fire, water, earth, air, spirit. And in my practices, those are meaningful practices for me. And I don't have a lot of ego about needing to prove to anyone that these are real experiences that I'm having, because for me, the value isn't in being able to prove something to somebody else. The value is in, does it affect my life positively or not? And these practices have dramatically positively affected my life, and that's why I do them. And that's enough for me. And that's why this is a witchy self-care practice podcast, and not a, like, let me tell you the gospel truth about spirituality podcast, because I don't have a gospel truth to offer you. I just have, these are my experiences, and I find it really exciting to talk about and lead classes and workshops with other people around these experiences and compare notes and learn what everyone else's experiences are and put them together and learn together. I feel like that journey is one that I love taking, and I love guiding other people on, and that's enough for me. Like, I don't need to be a bastion of spiritual truth. For me, these practices are valid and important no matter what I believe is going on under the hood. And so I say this all to you. You've probably heard me say variations on this before, so that you'll understand that for me, the word intuition has often been a tricky concept. Today, during my intuition workshop, which if you're interested in accessing and you were not around for, I can get you access to it because it was a free workshop. So if you email me, sassafrastarot@gmail.com, I'm happy to do that. We were talking about being an empath versus being hypervigilant. Hold please, I'm doing a hydration checkpoint. I invite you to hydrate with me. Getting over a little cold. I have to remember to stay hydrated. Okay. So during the workshop, I was asking people about their relationship with intuition, and I didn't plan this, but the word empath came up. A couple people described themselves as an empath, and what was very interesting was that they were not necessarily describing themselves that way in a way that I felt was empowering. And I say this I don't mean that to be a judgment upon them. It was just me kind of perceiving how they said it. I had people say, I am an empath and it causes problems for me. I am an empath, and sometimes that input of other people's stuff is so overwhelming that I can experience anxiety. It can re-trigger my trauma, all of this. And I asked because I'm curious about this, and this is a discussion I've seen a lot on the internet that I have personal investment in. If you identify as an empath, in some way or another, say so in the chat. And if you identify as hypervigilant or having anxiety from past trauma, put that in the chat. And the reason I was doing this was not to prove a point. It's just that I see that there's a lot of crossover between these two, and I wanted to make it very clear, I'm not going to try and change how you identify. Your self-concept is your self-concept. It's not mine to speak on. I know, however, for me, that much of what I have perceived to be me being an empath in the past, I can look at now where I'm at in my healing journey and be like, I'm not sure that this is empathy in terms of some kind of ability to tune into other people's feelings. People often attribute empath as a spiritual thing that they are tuned into. Or if it's just hypervigilance from the fact of needing to manage other people's emotions in order to protect myself from a young age, right? And a lot of people have that experience. A lot of people have the experience of I had to learn to read whatever it might be, a caregiver, the moods of other kids around me so I didn't get bullied, right? I had to learn to read people's moods so that I could take care of myself, so that I didn't get bullied, so that I could, if I was being abused, not be abused, so that I could tell if someone was in a good mood or a bad mood and adjust myself to it, right? A lot of people have had those traumatic experiences that have resulted. It's interesting because I've talked with a number of people about this topic. It does result in an ability to kind of read the room and read other people's vibe in a way that almost does feel a little psychic. And I'm not sure, it also depends on how we define intuition. I'm not sure whether it is some kind of psychic ability or whether it's actually just us being able to tune into our body's natural perceptions and being a bit more tuned into it in the same way that someone who maybe is born blind or with a visual deficit may tune into their aural perceptions, the perceptions from their ears or their other senses a little bit more to compensate, right? So if we had to get very, very good at reading someone's mood right away, our body, especially as a child with a developing mind, might have just gotten really good at that. Might have gotten really good at reading micro expressions, right? At also getting to know an individual person's habits deeply so that, for example, if you've been living with someone for a lot of years, you can probably read whether they're in a bad mood before they even open their mouth, right? Where if they come in and they kind of close the door a certain way and they kind of put their stuff down in a certain way, you can tell whether they're on top of the world and have some news to share with you, or whether they had a really bad day and they're feeling depleted, or whether they're angry about something. And depending on your own personal past, you might have trauma around some of that. If you sense that someone's in a bad mood when they come in, even if it has nothing to do with you, you might already go into fight, flight, fawn mode, right? Because you're trying to manage it. Now, a lot of people who have that experience identify as empaths. I'm not even saying they're wrong to, because is this heightened sense of awareness of another person's vibe or energy? Perhaps it is reasonable to describe it as empathy, but I also would argue that it's a completely normal thing that our bodies and minds are capable of doing and doesn't necessarily have to cross into the realm of the supernatural. You know what I mean? And I find that it can be a very fixed belief when people say I'm an empath, and often what I hear from them is I get too much input and I feel overwhelmed and it stresses me out and it's difficult. And it's like what they're really saying is, I'm getting all this information, and it's more information than I really want, but I don't know how to stop listening, which does sound a lot like hypervigilance, doesn't it? And neither's right or wrong. You know what I mean? I a little bit maybe identify as both at the end of this conversation. But I think what's helpful is to know, do you have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? Do you say, I'm an empath, and so I feel other people's emotions and I have to be very careful because that can really drag me down? That's a very fixed mindset. Versus, I have the ability to read some energy. And it's probably helped me at some points and probably harmed me at others because it can trigger my own anxieties and my own fight or flight response. And I can choose to learn what to do with this ability. I can choose to harness it for when it's useful. For example, during an important conversation with someone that is important to me, I can choose to use this ability to be more present in that conversation, be more compassionate, and understand things beyond just what is being said. And I can also choose to protect myself from that by choosing, for example, not to read subtext even if I see it, because that might be a trauma response that I am trying to, to not lean into every minute, or choosing to visualize a protective bubble around myself and tell myself that how other people are feeling is not my business unless they choose to tell me, because that will allow me to move through my day not making their problems my problem, right? And so that's more of a growth mentality, right? And I don't think how we define ourselves matters a whole lot. Whether that's intuition and that's some kind of spiritual experience or it's a psychological one, what's important and interesting to me is whether we choose to allow it to be something we can use for our highest good and work with, or whether we choose to view it as a liability. And intuition is one of those things where there are people who define intuition as being like emotional wisdom, straight up, right? Like it's just that side of yourself that processes things perhaps in a nonverbal way. Body wisdom, emotional wisdom, things like gut feelings and stuff like that. And there are people who really define it as like tuning into spirit energy or tuning into some kind of collective unconscious or informational web or Akashic records. There's a variety of different beliefs around this, right? Or tuning into God or angel messages, again, depending on where your beliefs lie. So it's this word that has so many different beliefs around it. And I kind of have come to the belief that it's not really important to me how you define it. It's not really too important to me what you think is going on under the hood. What's important to me is how you work with it. And I think we all have some level of intuitive wisdom we can work with, whatever we believe is happening under the hood. And learning to work with it in a healthy way also requires emotional wisdom. And that means self-awareness and doing the work, shadow work, friends, whatever you want to call it, right? It means showing up for our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with our feelings. Because if we have any kind of psychic gifts or intuitive gifts, we can't interpret them well if our feelings are so big that they are screaming at us and all we hear is our feelings. They get mixed up. Now, I'm a tarot reader that has a good reputation. And what I mean is I have a reputation for being accurate. I also have a reputation for being a little bit of a therapist during my tarot readings. I have a reputation that if you get a reading from me, I'm both going to tell you stuff that's really true about your life and going to also help you process and understand it so you feel empowered to make good choices at the end of it, not stuck. That's who I've cultivated myself to be as a tarot reader. That's me living my values, right? There are other readers with other types of reputations, and, it takes different kinds, right? It takes all different kinds in this world. So you might prefer someone else. There are readers who have a reputation for like, I just tell you the truth, and you might feel like you've been slapped in the face by the truth, but I tell you what I see, like it or lump it. And there are people who really want that kind of experience, And there are other readers who, whether they're doing this consciously or not, I think often not, are really more reading the room and telling their client what they think their client wants to hear. And or reading the room, sensing what their client wants to hear, and telling them things based on not so much what their intuition and guidance and cards is telling them or whatever, but based on their own internal biases. And I've been read for by people like that, and it's very frustrating. And what I've learned is usually they are not conscious that they're doing it. They think everything they're getting is like intuitive psychic spirit wisdom or whatever. And it's clear to me that they're reading stuff into me that's not there. And I think that that's a common experience held by a lot of queer people. Probably, I would imagine, also a lot of people of color, a lot of people who are part of any kind of minority culture. I've had experiences with readers where I've gone in not necessarily saying too much about myself, or asked a question or said, here's what I'm thinking about, and had them assume I was heterosexual, assume I wanted to get married and have kids, and make assumptions about what kind of career I did or didn't have, and make assumptions about what I wanted in a partner. And none of that, I think, was conscious for them. I don't think any of them were like, oh, I'm sizing you up. Because if they were sizing me up incorrectly. So I've had readers tell me and seem to think that was what I wanted to hear. Like, oh, this man is going to marry you and you're going to have children together. Y'all, I don't want kids. And I'm also not straight. I'm a bisexual individual, and my love interest is not necessarily going to be a man. I've had people assume that my career was a different type of career than it is. I'm very entrepreneurial. I'm creative. I've had people hear that I'm a musician and assume that I'm waiting for a big break and want to get signed. And all of that's fine in conversation, but I've had a lot of people who are psychic readers get a lot of really basic stuff wrong about me. And to me, this is not me saying like, oh, it proves that all psychics are hacks. No, but it does prove that these people, the individuals with whom I've had these readings, because it's not always the case, are not doing a good job of discerning between their intuitive insights and their ingrained biases and personal feelings, right? A lot of people have an ingrained bias towards heterosexuality. A lot of people, I'm a white person and I'm aware that I probably have some ingrained biases, and I try to root them out in myself, that are white supremacist in nature. Just as like people have ingrained patriarchal biases and people have ingrained, heteronormative biases and homophobic biases. I'm aware that I probably have that, and I work to find them in myself so that I can overcome them. So the important thing here is the better you know yourself, the better you can act in the world. Both, the better you can act on your values. Because you might realize one day, oh my God, I just assumed blah, 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 blah about this person walking down the street that I don't know. And that's whatever, racist, homophobic, a little patriarchal, like, wow, those are just things that I made up. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you a product of your culture, right? We all have it. We've all been fed so much cultural information since we were pre-verbal that, yeah, we're going to soak up some of those biases. That's human. What makes us a good person and someone who lives our values is what we decide to do when we find one. Do we deny it and stomp our feet and be like, well, I'm not like that? Or do we look at ourselves and be like, oh, look at that. I made a biased assessment of somebody, and now I know better and I can do better. Now I see it in myself, and I can say to myself, hey, you weren't reading that person right. Like you can ask some questions and change your assumptions, right? Now let's talk about our own inner emotional landscape, where it's not just about these cognitive biases, it's also about our own feelings. When we're seeking answers intuitively for ourselves, often it's about topics that are very emotional for us, and it can be very, very difficult to discern between, is this my big feelings or is this my intuition? Hydration checkpoint. Please hydrate with me. I invite you to. Again, speaking to my experiences as a reader and someone who has been read for. And by the way, I've had a lot of, I'm singling out the experiences where I feel something has gone wrong in a reading, where I talk about people reading their cognitive biases, reading rather than reading me or whatever. I've had a lot of really, really powerful tarot readings from other people and other types of readings from other people. So I've had both experiences, and the people whom I've had those powerful readings with, I go back to again and again, because I want to have them. They're meaningful. They help. But I'm singling out where things go wrong because I want you to be able to build the insight and discernment to not have these really easy things go wrong. It's very easy for them to go wrong. Our mind is kind of built to let them go wrong. So I'm kind of trying to help you see the pitfalls so that you can avoid them for yourself. That is kind of my thesis here, is that you can't do intuition well, whatever we believe intuition is, without the emotional wisdom to see yourself. Yes, that means cognitive biases. Also, yes, it means emotional bias. I have had people read, I teach tarot, and I also am friends with many people who read, and I've had conversations with people who have difficulty reading for themselves, both as a teacher and just as a, someone talking shop. There's two big categories, and some people fall broadly into one or the other, and some people kind of vacillate, and for some it depends on the topic, whatever. There are people who, instead of reading the tarot cards, read their wishful thinking into the reading, what they would like to see. And also, secondary to this, if you're reading for others, there are people who read their people-pleasing into a reading. They don't want to tell you something negative, so they'll make up something nice, even though the reading is not saying something nice. And there are people who are their own worst enemies during the reading. They'll read tarot cards, and even if it's really great cards or cards with promise, they'll see only the negative aspects because they are ready to beat themselves up and make themselves wrong. And secondary to this, if they're reading for somebody else, these are the people who are like, well, I just tell it like it is, sweetheart. Like, you got to work on this problem, who see problems, and feel that it's their duty to communicate to the person what the problem is. Which almost can, devolve into concern trolling, where you're like, I'm just concerned about you. And then the person proceeds to kind of tell you a bunch of really upsetting / disempowering shit, And I think in both cases, first of all, it's not usually fully conscious. It's a subconscious behavior. And the person really does think they're doing their best, right? Well, it's important to me to convey the truth, not what someone wants to hear. They're valuing truth, right? And people who self-sabotage by thinking the worst about themselves have a tendency to prioritize darker, negative interpretations as being more likely to be true, and more positive interpretations as being more likely to be frivolous or pretend. Now, on the other end of that spectrum, people who read their wishful thinking into a reading, this is really... it comes out of emotional protectiveness. It comes out of, if I see this really dark thing, I might not be ready to face it, so I'm going to read something. Again, this is subconscious. I'm going to read something that I can handle seeing. And it takes a step further into people-pleasing and caretaking, where I've watched people read for others. I've watched myself. I've wrestled with this myself, because I definitely fall on the people-pleaser end of the spectrum. Read for others and know that what really needs to happen is they need to hear something that is maybe difficult but true, and process that, and not wanted to say so because we don't want to upset the other person. And the truth is that neither approach is really helpful. The truth is, most readings probably include some things you'd like to hear and some things you would not like to hear, right? And also, the most helpful practice for us when we're dealing with topics that are emotionally charged, which we almost universally are as a tarot reading, no one gets a reading of any kind for something they don't care about. They want to know about something they care about. They're emotionally invested. When we're dealing with topics that are emotionally charged, giving ourselves or others a ticket to check out and not deal with the emotions is not the kindness we think it is. Nor is it kind to be like, well, just deal with it. This is painful and you're just going to, this is life. Buck up, sweetie. That's also not helpful. What's helpful instead is to develop the kind of compassion and emotional skill set and toolbox to be able to say, this is difficult and we're going to walk through this difficult thing together. Right? That's what doing the work looks like, is facing the difficult shit. The only way out is through. That doesn't mean we have to push ourselves past our comfort zone so we're constantly miserable. It also doesn't mean that we get to gloss over the stuff that's uncomfortable that we'd rather not acknowledge. We have to acknowledge the difficult stuff, and we can hold our own hand while we do it. And if we're reading for someone, we have a duty to, I think we have a responsibility to both be real about what we believe the reading is telling us and also be kind. Because if all we do is say, this is what the cards are saying, and this is how it's got to be, and this is what you've got to fix, and this touches on like a trauma for someone, we're not doing them a favor. All we've done is traumatize them with our reading, right? If we're like, well, guess what? This bad stuff is coming. Everything you feared is going to come to pass, and you have to deal with this, and your life is basically going to be falling apart. It's the tower. It's just the cards, right? Well, that traumatizes someone, and that makes them feel powerless. And nobody makes a good decision when they feel traumatized and powerless. Mostly we don't make any decisions when we feel traumatized and powerless. We go into some kind of a fight or flight or fawn stress response, right? Our goal as readers should not be to put our clients into a fight or flight or fawn stress response. Instead, our goal should be to deliver them information and compassion in a way that allows them to be empowered, right? Just like a good therapist does. Like, yep, we're going to have to face this together, but it doesn't have to be as scary as you think. Right? Like when you take your kid to the doctor and they have to get a shot. And I am of the belief that lying to your kid and saying it's not going to hurt when shots hurt, isn't that helpful and isn't that great for your relationship. But if you're like, it is going to hurt, but it's just going to be for a minute and I'm going to be right here and you can squeeze my hand. Right? Saying like, yes, this is something hard we have to do, but it's worth it. And you're going to find out that it's over in a minute and you're strong enough for this, right? That is what I think we need to bring. That energy, that wise emotional compassion to our readings. And I've been talking in the context of tarot because I'm a tarot reader and because honestly, it's a topic people seek advice from me about all the time. But I want you to know that this applies to every type of intuition. My own journey with intuition has, because of my discomfort with what intuition does and doesn't mean, there are so many different definitions of it, right? And the only way I've been able to have a good journey with intuition was to be willing to arrive at my own definition, to be willing to arrive at like, well, I don't know exactly what's happening. It feels to me like it's something beyond just kind of my body and mind's perceptions that I'm tapping into, but I do think that's probably a part of it, you know, the subconsciously registered things being made conscious, as well as perhaps tapping into some kind of like bigger web of information that I am connected to that is outside of just myself. That's my personal belief, and it doesn't have to be yours. But in order to be able to work with intuition, I've had to arrive at a functional personal belief like that. And part of it involves the emotional wisdom of being willing to believe in something that I know other people might ridicule and being comfortable with that. And being comfortable with not having to jump to prove it to someone else. I've dated almost exclusively, but not exclusively. I've dated a lot of loud atheists. And in particular, several of them were not just atheists about like, atheist means not believing in God, but like, I don't believe in anything basically. Except science. But if someone does a scientific study around, for example, essential oils, I'm going to still pretend it was a trumped up study because I think that's woo-woo nonsense. You know, like there was a little bit of tendency to skew belief towards skepticism, I guess I would say, in people that I've dated and been close to in my life. And as a result, it's been difficult for me to lean into a spiritual practice because of my fear of ridicule, because of my fear that they would think I was stupid. And I've had to come to the emotional comfort with myself of being able to validate my own experiences regardless of whether other people validate them. And that has helped me in every single area of my life, not just in pursuing my spirituality and intuition. So the good news about pursuing intuition this way is that it will heal you, as it will help you with everything, and also it'll make your intuition better. Like, I think it's a necessary ingredient for intuition, and I also think it's just a good practice in life. So how do we do this? How do we practice discerning between our intuition and our emotions? That's really the focus of this podcast. And if you're interested in working to expand your intuition with me, I'm going to invite you to email me and ask for a link. In fact, I'll put it in the show notes. I'll put a link for the sign up for the intuition workshop, even though it's happening this weekend and it will have passed by the time the podcast airs, because the replay will still be there. And I want you to have access to the workshop if you want it. But my focus for the podcast is really going to be about that discernment of emotional versus intuition. And I'm going to move into Which You Got This, which is the portion of the podcast where I talk about what we can do practically to work with the ideas I've been discussing. I've been talking kind of around the bush about discerning between our intuition, information that is valuable coming in, versus emotional and cognitive biases. And so I'm going to give you a practice to help you do that discernment. And if you are a bonus patron, I'm going to record a couple of practices to help you, having done this practice, to help you tune into your intuition and interpret what you get. So be aware that you're getting that. And it's going to be similar, but not the same as the stuff that was in the intuition workshop. Because the intuition workshop is kind of time limited. I'm kind of covering all of this into two 90-minute sessions. If you're a bonus patron, I'm going to just give you the direct practices to access your intuition. And what you're about to get as a listener to the podcast is the practice to first do an emotional inventory so that you know what you're getting is intuition, not emotional noise or cognitive bias or whatever. And the practice is doing an emotional inventory for yourself. And so I invite you to do this both as a somatic practice as well as an intellectual practice, because different people tune into their own experiences in both ways. And I find that largely it's one or the other. Largely people have like a kind of very embodied somatic practice, or they have a practice that's kind of like in their heads, and there's a lot of visualization and imagination. That's a real word, imagination. And often people have trouble crossing that bridge. So I try to offer options for both. So I'm going to invite you to do both and find what's more meaningful to you. I'm going to invite you to do, for the first part of our emotional inventory, just a very somatic process, a body check-in. If you haven't done a body check-in before, you probably have, because it's built into a lot of simple meditative practices that different people teach. We start by getting comfortable so that we're not, we're seated comfortably. We're not going to either fall asleep or be driven to distraction by something like a tight piece of clothing or our foot falling asleep or, standing in an uncomfortable way or whatever. So get yourself comfortable. I'm not going to lead you through this as a meditation. I'm just going to give you the instructions so that you can do this yourself. You then focus on your breath. Breath is the center of a lot of meditative practices, but doesn't have to be. If that is something that can cause you stress, which I have heard from a few people, then you can focus on another physical aspect to your existence. But breath is nice because we all have it, and our body kind of does it without us needing any extra help. In general, focus on the breath is like always it's a good focus for your meditation, but not the only one. You can focus on what you hear around you. You can focus on the feel of the air on your skin. You can focus on tuning into different parts of your body, and that's what we'll be doing. Let's start with our breathing. If it's comfortable for you, we breathe in through our nose and out through our mouth, but please breathe however is comfortable for you. We just feel the air travel in and out of our body. And this places us in our body. This allows us to remember we are physical beings. And then we begin to more fully experience ourselves as a person with a body. Begin to more fully experience what it is like to be in this body. We begin to place our attention on our physical experience. We move our attention perhaps from the top of our head to the center of our head where our brain is, to our face, to the back of our head and the base of our skull, to our neck, to our shoulders. And we're going to scan through our whole body in this way. And we're not looking to have judgment or take away some big thing or fix something. We're just looking to experience. Oh, I feel a little bit of lightness at the top of my head. Oh, I feel a little bit of tension in the back of my neck. Oh, I just feel some weird movement in my squishy organ area. I don't know, it just kind of feels movie. We're not looking to be right or wrong. We're just looking to experience what it feels like to live inside our squishy human body. And we do this as a practice. And invariably, we will find things that our brain tries to make other connections. Oh, what I feel is anxiety at the small of my back. That's why I'm tense right now. It might be true. I'm not telling you not to make those judgment calls. You know your body. You know your feelings, right? That's a deeper level of knowing. We begin to tune into our emotions as well. We can choose what we want to do. We can just sit with that emotion. We can do what we might have subconsciously been doing and tense up and hope it goes away, which usually, spoiler alert, doesn't work. We can breathe into it. That's a good way to just kind of be with an emotion, is just to visualize our breath going there and be like, I'm feeling this feeling. It's a physical feeling now. I'm just going to breathe with it and let it do what it does. Which is the equivalent of just sitting with a friend who is grieving, right? A friend is feeling something big. We can't fix it for them, but we can say, I will sit with you. You don't have to face it alone. So we can do that with our own body. We can say, I am experiencing pain. Maybe it's physical, maybe it's emotional, whatever. I'm just going to breathe. I'm just going to sit with it. I'm not going to turn away. I'm offering myself that level of kindness and compassion. So we move through our body in this way, and we then may wish to take a moment. This is an inventory, so we'll be writing some things down. We can jot down what we noticed. Just what jumps out. We don't have to catalog everything. If it seems unremarkable, it's fine. But like, oh, I noticed that I have tension in my neck and my shoulders. I noticed that I have to, on purpose, relax my neck and my shoulders. I noticed that my feet are a little cold, and I might have to go put on some socks. I noticed that I'm feeling a little bit of pain in my stomach, and I'm noticing that it, for some reason, makes me think about this conversation I had with someone, and I realized that I felt like they didn't like me or didn't see me or something, right? We're not judging ourselves as right or wrong. We're just noticing what we notice and what we feel and writing it down. That's our emotional inventory. We're just locating the weather. What is the weather of your body right now? What is the weather of your emotional state right now? That's what we're doing in an emotional inventory. And after that, we can do a little more of an intellectual inventory. And I'm going to give you some prompts. Let me find this in my notes. The intellectual inventory. Oh, I closed it. Apologize, guys. Let me find it. Here it is. Because I want to just give you things you can write down. And I'll try to put this in the show notes as well. It's still emotional, but we're doing it more intellectually by completing sentences. We might write this down. We might just think it through. So here are your prompts. When I tuned into my body, I noticed. And you can complete that sentences as many times as you want. The feelings coming up for me today are, and again, complete that sentence as many times as you want. I am worrying about. I am hoping. Today, I find myself thinking about. It feels important to me because. So we're not trying to judge ourselves. We're just trying to get it down. We're just trying to get an understanding, right? And when you do an emotional inventory like this, things come up. You realize, wow, I've been thinking about that conversation I had 2 days ago. Like, it just keeps running through my mind, and I just keep thinking about what I should have said, you know? How we always come up with a perfect comeback like 2 days later because we're thinking about it nonstop. Oh, I've been thinking about that a lot. Like, that's a part of my emotional landscape. And then the next prompt might make us ask ourselves why. It's important to me because, and we might really uncover something. It might be like, oh, I felt judged by that person in the moment, but I realized that part of why it has hit me so hard is because it's a judgment I think I've been making on myself. And even though I'm pissed off at that person, I might need to get right with myself around this, right? That kind of thing. But we don't need to have a breakthrough. We're just having an inventory. We're just, here's the weather. We're just being aware, right? Often awareness does bring some breakthroughs, but you're not doing it wrong if you don't get one. Then we're going to do an inventory. When we do an intuitive practice, it's helpful to ask a question. It's helpful not just to say, what you got to tell me? Because we don't actually want to ask the universe for information about anything. We don't want to hear about what a guy across the world had for breakfast that day. That's not useful information for our intuition to bring us, nor is it information we can confirm or deny if we don't know the guy, right? We want it to be at least a little relevant, so we try to give ourselves a focus, and the focus might be what's going to come up that's important in my life in the next week, right? That's a good general focus that still is a little focused. The focus might be, what should I do around this difficult relationship? Or what can I do to move my career forward in this direction? Or I'm hurting, how can I take care of myself, right? We give ourselves a focus. Before we move into consulting our intuition, I'm going to ask you to do another emotional inventory. And this emotional inventory is more specific about this topic. So here are some more prompts for you. How do I feel about this topic? Thinking about this topic, what comes up is, I worry that, I hope that. And this kind of gets some of the emotional weather down. And it's so that we can spot it right away if we're experiencing some bias. You know, for example, if we're asking ourselves, what can I do? What can I do in this difficult relationship? I've got someone who I feel like is pushing my boundaries a little bit and I don't know how to respond to them, right? Maybe that's what we're asking for intuition. As we do an emotional inventory, we might find this reminds me of how a teacher or a caregiver pushed my boundaries when I was younger and it made me feel very powerless. We might find I feel angry when this happens, but I don't want to ruin the relationship, so I just sit on the anger. We might find, I don't know that you'll find this, right? This is just an example. We might find, I worry that if I have strong boundaries that this person won't like me anymore. We might find, I hope that they just understand it without me having to say anything because this is uncomfortable, right? And as we identify these big emotions we're having, this can help us be like a little fire alarm, because if we tune into our intuition, whether we just kind of straight up do an intuitive practice, which bonus patrons, $5 and up patrons will be getting in the bonus episodes some intuitive practices you can use. Also, you're welcome, anyone who's listening to this, to get access to my free intuition workshop. I will give you the link is tinyurl.com/intuition workshop 2024, but I'll put that in the show notes for you. Or whether you're doing a reading, right? When you're asking yourself, if you find that all the answers your intuition, air quotes, is giving you are exactly the same answers as your hopes and fears, it's time to be a little suspicious, right? And I will close by saying that there are topics on which consulting your intuition is not going to be effective, and that doesn't make you a failure, that makes you a human. Another thing many people said in my intuition workshop was, I'm better at being intuitive for others than myself. And you know what? That also doesn't make you a failure. It makes you a human. Sometimes we're so emotionally invested. I had a couple people do the intuitive exercise and tell me I couldn't get past the emotions. I recognized that they were the emotions because we just did the emotional inventory. But I found that the emotions were so big that I couldn't hear any intuition. I just heard the emotions. And that was really helpful. That's great information, right? What if you didn't do an emotional inventory? What if, for example, your body is so lit up and upset by something that literally to think about this topic deeply makes you just go like, no, makes you freeze up and tense, right? If you had not done an emotional inventory, you might think that was your intuition. You might think, oh, this is my gut telling me this is a bad idea, but it might actually just be trauma, right? It might be that you have discomfort and trauma around something and need some care, and your intuition will not be able to weigh in until you get that care. And so sometimes what our intuition tells us is not, here's the solution you were hoping to get. Instead, it's, you're not going to be able to think rationally about this until you take care of yourself. Go take care of yourself. And that is the answer to your intuition. That is the correct next step, right? If something is so big emotionally for you that you're like, I can't be rational, I can't evaluate rationally any information I might get because I'm so emotional about it, then the correct next step is to take care of your emotions. You might need to grieve. You might need to just feel your feelings. You might need to stamp your feet and get mad about something, right? You might need to be upset about all the times you tried something like this in the past that didn't work, or all the stories that come up for you around this. You might need to let yourself feel how fearful you are about this situation and be kind to yourself through that, right? You might need to reparent yourself. You might need to hold your hand through your hard emotions. You might need to give yourself care. And sometimes what we need isn't intuition, it's care. And when we consult our intuition on those matters, it will tell you, you can't even hear me. You're not hearing the intuition, all you're hearing is your feelings, so go take care of your feelings. And that is the answer that day. So that's not a failure, that's just reality of what it is like to be human. And the more you take care of yourself and your emotions, the more you show up for your emotional experience, the more you will be able to discern, this is my intuition, this is an emotional reaction that needs care. We're not doing this to devalue our emotions. We're not doing this to be like, oh, big dumb idiot me, I'm just having this stupid emotional reaction instead of getting my intuition. No, we just got pointed to the next point on our journey. Isn't that what we were consulting our intuition for? So that we could know what the next point in our journey was? Well, it turns out the next point in our journey was care. Something we're often taught to ignore, right? We're taught to feel like as adults, we shouldn't need emotional care anymore. That's for children. Well, no, it's not. Everyone has feelings, it turns out, our whole lives, right? And sometimes the next part of your journey is taking care of yourself. Similarly, if you were trying to get to work one day and you fell and broke your leg, you wouldn't be like, well, I have to get to work, so I'm just going to go and walk on a broken leg, because you're probably not going to get there. You're going to be in a lot of pain. You wouldn't put yourself through it, you know? You would get care for your leg and you would let your boss or whoever know, like, I can't come to work, I broke my leg, right? Now, if you have emotional situation that is debilitating your ability to see things clearly, we are taught in this society to suck it up anyway. And that's why a lot of fights happen, and that's why a lot of bad choices get made, right? People self-sabotage by sucking up and not facing their emotions. And instead, if you take care of those emotions, you get some healing. It gets better and better, not worse and worse. And I'm not saying that things heal overnight, right? A broken leg, for example, isn't going to heal overnight. But if you go to the doctor, it will definitely eventually get better. And if you don't, it will definitely get worse and cause you big problems. And similarly with our emotional healing, if we show up for our healing, which might include mental health professionals, right? Which might include a care team, and might also, hopefully will also include compassion and love for ourselves, right? And love from our chosen family. If we do show up for it, we're on the right track of healing that, and we can begin to see progress. And if we don't, we are guaranteed that things will get worse. And so sometimes the next step that your intuition is pointing to you towards is healing. That's not you failing at intuition. That's you doing intuition right and receiving the assignment. And now your job is to understand it and do the healing work, right? So thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Intuition and emotional wisdom have to go hand in hand. Otherwise, you're not going to be good at intuition. You're not going to get the results you want to get. And also, your life just gets better when you show up for your emotional healing, when you show up for the work. So it's like both things are true. And the more you do the work, the more you'll be able to access your intuition, right? When you have a wound that feels so raw that even to think about that topic, your body is screaming at you or your mind is saying, no, no, no. Trying to do intuition around that, first of all, it's not very nice. It's not a very nice thing to do to yourself, right? To be like, I just need answers. Well, no, you need care, right? you need care. That is the answer. That's the first answer. And then once you get the care, it won't hurt so much that it prevents you from seeing clearly. And you'll be able to maybe access your intuition or access simply a wiser state of mind about it, right? These two things work hand in hand. So thank you so much for tuning in. Please feel free to reach out and connect with me. You can find me anywhere. I am at Sassafras Tarot on pretty much all the social medias. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Twitch, I'm on YouTube, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I'm also sassafrastarot@gmail.com. If you would like to order a reading from me, you can just reach out. You can email me, or you can visit my Etsy shop by searching Sassafras Tarot on Etsy. And it's been really wonderful getting to work with you. If you'd like to work with me around intuition, I am running a 6-week intuition transformation journey right now. And I say it that way because the journey will look different for different people. Intuition and emotional wisdom is very, very personal. Your journey might look more like a healing journey. If that's what needs the focus, your journey might look more like a opening up and tuning into your senses journey. If that is where the focus is right now, it might be a hybrid of both. What I can tell you is it will change your life. And I know that because it changed my life. So if you're interested in that, reach out to me, send me an email, find me on social media. You'll probably see me posting about it. I'll also put a link in the show notes to my 2-day intuition workshop, which I am in the middle of, so that you can get in and do those practices. You'll get the replay, and you can do these practices again and again. And if all you did was show up for these practices regularly, your life will change. Your emotional life will change, and your intuitive gifts will change. So we'll grow. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful day. Make sure you're being loving to yourself. Bye, friends.